with a BS in physics from Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He also holds a PhD in physics from Tel Aviv University and an MA in public administration from the Harvard Kennedy School. Hussein Abdul-Hussain is a research fellow at FDD. He focused on the Gulf region and Yemen, including on Gulf relations with Iran and Gulf peace with Israel. Born and raised in Beirut, Baghdad, and Baalbek, cities that have been the theater of major Middle Eastern events, Hussein earned a degree in history and archaeology from the American University of Beirut, after which he worked as a reporter and later managing editor at Beirut's The Daily Star. He reported from war zones on the Lebanese border with Israel and from Iraq. In Washington, Hussein helped set up and manage the Arabic satellite network Al-Hura Iraq, after which he headed the Washington Bureau of Kuwaiti Daily Al-Rai. Hussein has worked as a visiting fellow with London's Chatham House and has published in English in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and in Arabic in various publications. His analysis has been quoted by Vox, the Jerusalem Post, and Newsweek. Hussein has appeared on CNN and MSNBC and is a frequent commentator on major Arabic satellite networks. Moderating the conversation today is Lawrence Muscant, Senior Vice President at FDD. As a Middle East analyst and speechwriter, Lawrence lectures often on Iran, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and Middle East history to audiences across the globe. Thank you to each of you for taking time to come to our J and empower us with knowledge. I'm so happy that you all joined us this morning, and we are confident that the expertise and experiences present in this room will lead to a fruitful and illuminating discussion. Enjoy your breakfast and a stimulating conversation that awaits us.
Morning, everybody. Ooh, that was loud. You can hear me, I'm assuming? Thank you so much for coming. We're very excited to be here. Special thanks to Amelia and Corey Perlstein and to the JCC MetroWest. It's actually my first time in the center, and it's really been amazing for the hour that we've been here. I was going to actually have them introduce themselves and their bios, but it was already done, so we can get right into the program. My name is Lawrence. I'm the Senior Vice President at FDD, and I thought in terms of the run of the show today, I want to tell you a little bit about FDD, what we do, and then I want to get right into a discussion, maybe for 30 minutes with my colleagues, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. No questions are off the table. Feel free to ask whatever you like on the topics they discuss or anything else. I'd also like to say, look, since October 7th, we spoke with some of your leadership before here. It's obviously been a very trying time for Israel, a trying time for the Jewish community in America. And that's why it's so heartening for us to come here and see a community like MetroWest really come out in support for not only Israel, but also for their JCC. I know this isn't a fundraiser, and you probably are never going to hear people in your community come from different organizations and ask for money for their host organization. But what I'm telling you is this community and the institution that we're in is one of the best in the country. And I'm urging all of you, I know times are tough and there's a lot of important causes, but right now I think there's no better cause than supporting your JCC and building the community. This war that Israel is in is not going to end tomorrow. It's not going to end a week from now. It's not going to end months from now. And you need to have a strong JCC, strong leadership. So please do all you can. I'm sure there are people here to guide you through that process. FDD, we're a national security policy institute in DC. We're not a Jewish organization. We're not an Israel organization. We're an American organization. I like to tell people we are a motley crew of about 70 people that come from all different backgrounds, different religions, different ethnicities, but all share a common conviction in the importance of a strong America. Strong America, we believe, makes a more peaceful world. We also understand that Israel is the canary in the coal mine, that Israel is America's most valuable and most vulnerable ally. And we also understand that what happened, the horrific terrorist attacks that happened in Israel on October 7th, is not only a threat to Israel and not only a threat to the Jewish community, but also a threat to America. Right? And that's something that we're trying to spread that very important message. Our organization was founded shortly after the terrorist attacks of 9/11. But what was interesting is we were actually conceived of 2 weeks before 9/11. And I don't mean to be ageist, but I think a lot of people in this room will know the two people who founded us. Your children probably may know, and your grandchildren, if you have any, definitely will not know. One was Jean Kirkpatrick. Remember Jean, who was President Reagan's ambassador to the UN, she's a Democrat, and Jack Kemp, a Republican. But it was particularly Jean. She was very concerned that the United States was taking a holiday from history at the end of the Cold War. If you remember, there were a wave of terrorist attacks against the United States. The USS Cole, our towers, our embassies in Africa. And at the time, Jean was looking to our allies in Israel and seeing a wave of suicide attacks during the Intifada. And she was very concerned that those type of tactics and the ideologies behind those tactics were going to come hit us in the United States. And it was a very prescient thought, because right in all of your backyard, 9/11 happened. Long story being very short, she brought together a group of former government officials, some visionary philanthropists, and we launched our institute. We come from all different backgrounds. I come from the private sector. Eyal comes from government and intelligence. Hussain, journalist, expert, military. But again, we all share that same strong conviction. To be very blunt, we wake up every morning when we go in the office and we're looking for ways to expose and to do serious measurable damage to the enemies of the United States and our allies. That's sort of the culture, the entrepreneurial culture we have. As our introducer mentioned, we're a nonpartisan organization. We call balls and strikes. I tell our staff all the time, we do policy, not politics. So I know in America and elsewhere, this is a very polarizing time politically. You're not going to hear from us ad hominem attacks one way or the other. You may not agree with our analysis, but we focus on the analysis itself. I think our communities are much stronger when they're united. Rather than focusing all the time on things we disagree on, we should be coming together on things that we agree on. And I'm sure we all agree that October 7th, things changed. So I guess I'll start with my first question to Eyal, who just came back from Israel a few weeks ago. You were in the States with us when October 7th happened. And I guess just very briefly what your impressions were about Israel, Israeli society, the people, what changed after October 7th?
Yeah. So I'll get to that in a second. I first want to say that, unlike Norris, this is my second time here. My first time here was 30 years ago. I was a trumpet player at Rishon LeZion Youth Orchestra. And we did a tour throughout this coast. I don't know if any of you heard us play. I'm not sure we were very good, but I remember I stood in the auditorium with my trumpet and I played Eyal Shamami. It was kind of yeah. And the second thing you should know is that my wife Adi, she went. She's a graduate of the school you helped build in Ra'anana called More MetroWest. So I feel at home. So thank you for having us. And back to Lord's question, yeah, so we came here as a family in the beginning of August. I finished my role as National Security Advisor in January. We thought it was a good time to take some time off, relax, give the kids a nice English experience. And FDD is the perfect place, or are the perfect place to come into. And of course, everything changed 54, if I'm not mistaken, days ago. On October 7th, actually, I was not with you in DC. I was one? Good. I was actually in the United Arab Emirates in a very special event commemorating 3 years for the Abraham Accords. And on Friday night, the 6th, this amazing dinner, the UAE ambassador to the US was sitting on one side, and Tom Knight, the previous American ambassador to Israel, a close friend, on the next, and the other people were there. We're talking about how wonderful the Abraham Accords are, and the transformation that they will bring to the region, the potential for that to have long-lasting effects on other issues, and you know, all of the good stuff that come with it. And then came the next morning, and I was late to a meeting, and I was looking at my phone, and you know, they were like, the phone explodes, right? I mean, you know how it is. When you woke up, it was you know, we knew a little bit more of what was going on that day. But being even an hour earlier than Israel, it was, you know, I just got it from the outset. It was really, really terrible. And I almost flew back that day, you know, thinking like, there is war, I have to be there if something like this happens. But you know, I spoke to my previous bosses, and it was clear that there wasn't a real reason to come back to Israel. Instead, I came back to DC to fight for the cause. Doing a lot of media, a lot of meetings like this and others, talking to the communities, because it is very, very, I think, disturbing in all of the aspects that we need to deal with, and some of it we'll cover, of course, later. I came back to Israel 3 weeks ago for a week. First time being in Israel since we left in August. And I've never seen my country so sad.
Can you speak up? We're having trouble.
Yeah. So which this one? Okay. Is it better now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? So as I said, I came back to Israel for a week, and I've never seen Israel so sad. People, you know, strong feeling of profound agony. You know, strong sense that this shouldn't have happened at all. Shouldn't have happened anywhere close to being like this. Not only in the military side, but in all aspects. This has been an ongoing crisis that exemplifies a complete dysfunction of. We won't talk politics today. Of this government, of everything that comes around with it, and a strong sense of even despair among some of the people. Having said that, what I also saw is an immense belief that we will get over it. I mean, you know, we were hit very badly. There was never a single day as bad as that since the end of the Second World War for the Jewish people. The fact that it happened in Israel, where we should be protected by the IDF, makes it even worse. But it's nowhere close to being existential. And I think the country is on its feet, fighting back. As Mark Dubovitz says in a tweet that became viral, that people are very empathic when Jews are being shot when they're on their knees, and not as necessarily as empathic when they stand up fighting. Well, Israel is standing up fighting, and even very, very strongly. And there is a sense of unity that we didn't have in Israel for a very long time in this, because indeed it's a crisis that hurt everybody. Everybody knows someone that has been either killed or abducted or in service in this war. We have family from Gaza that I visited. Miraculously survived, but friends that you know, families got released a few days ago from Gaza. Everybody knows someone in this, And this sense of crisis that brings us all together is very, very strong in Israel. The social organizations are in the move. All of the organizations that were protested against the government pivoted towards reaching out to the communities, to the people in need, either the displaced or the families of the abducted and so forth. So this is the situation as it is now. Of course, future questions we can talk about what it means and where it will go, but leave it at that.
Yeah, I could do one follow-up before I get to Hussein. I think one question that I'm sure is on everybody's mind is, how did this happen, right? And again, we don't want to get into personalities, politics, but I think it's fair to say it was a massive intelligence failure, military failure. I don't know if you could comment on that, and also specifically, what did Hamas and its other affiliates, what happened on October 7th?
Right. Well, I will assume that many of you have been covering the press very tightly since it happened. The question of how this happened, I think will follow our lives for generations to come. Right? I mean, I look at the audience. I wasn't born in the Yom Kippur War. I was born in '76. And all of us in Israel, and I think, quite frankly, Jewish people around the world always go back to how things like that happen. I worked for an intelligence organization. I worked for Mossad for 23 years. So I know the flaws of intelligence work and thinking. There are always conceptions. We always work with concepts of how things work. The problem is that sometimes we believe our own conceptions and don't doubt them seriously enough. And there will be more and more evidence coming out of people saying, well, we knew and we said and we alerted. And if you've been following Israeli media, there's a very strong even anger. Just hearing the stories of these young female soldiers who were viewing the cameras and saw the training and saw the preparations, and of course had advance warning towards that, and were overruled, and other things will come out. I want to say two things about this. As I was National Security Advisor, there are always things happening around us that are potential dramatic surprises. When you're Israel, there are intel of attacks, of terror attacks, of other issues, things that are emerging around the corner all the time. The responsibility of the leadership is to make sure that the organizations digest that and are able to amplify only those instances that can eventually mature and pick them up. As National Security Advisor, this was one of my responsibilities to do on behalf of the cabinet, of the Prime Minister, and we did that extensively. There isn't a day that I don't ask myself what would have happened if the previous government was still there, if I was still National Security Advisor. Would I miss that as well? Would the processes that we had at the time been able to do it better? We'll never know the answer to those questions, of course. But profoundly, this was a dysfunction of so many systems, of so many layers. The intelligence, in the military, in the way that they conducted the defenses in the communities, in the belief that the wall will be strong enough to hold against their attack, even though there were signals that they were preparing techniques to blow holes into this wall the way they actually did. When I was in Israel and walking in the communities, what the communities feel is not only the failure of the military to detect and protect against Hamas. This comes together with a complete dysfunction of most of the government ministries and organizations that need to provide the aid to the people. And it's really, I think, one of the worst times in the performance of us as a country. So, this is not a very optimistic way to start this morning, but this is the case. This is what happened. The only thing to be optimistic is that there will be a time for reform and rebuild, and we'll be very good at it.
So I want to go to Hussein right now, my amazing colleague. And I know we heard a little bit about your bio, but I want maybe talk a little bit more about your upbringing, because I want you to understand Hussein is one of the most vocal supporters of Israel in Washington, D.C. In many ways, he's extremely brave, because I hear the attacks that he gets on himself personally for espousing views, very controversial views like freedom and democracy and all these things. So, but you grew up in a society which did not teach you that. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about that, how you came to your positions, and then I want to ask you specifically about Hamas. You know very well.
Sure. Well, my dad is Iraqi and my mother is Lebanese, and I grew up in these two countries.
That mic is not working.
Until a point when we had to move out of Iraq because my dad had to fight in the war against Iran, and we moved to Lebanon. That was 1982. Not the best year to move to Lebanon. That was the year when Israel had just invaded.
Sorry about that.
That's fine. No offense. And I grew up partially in East Lebanon, in a town called Baalbek. And this is the time and the place when Hezbollah was being put together. And this is the time when all the people you see now are hijabis, the women and all the men who have beards. They weren't like this when I was growing up. Most of them were either communists or some other form of secular people. So I saw how governments like Iran can pay the way to change people. And as a young kid, I mean, my family was not really conservative, and we were on the secular side. And then we moved to Beirut, and Beirut is a bigger city, more secular. And I was one of the lucky ones who got to go to American schools and the American University of Beirut. And that really gave me tools and access to concepts that I was not aware of. Like Lawrence said, liberty, first and foremost, freedom, democracy, equality. And these ideas were just ideas until the war in Iraq happened in 2003. And as someone whose family was forced out of Iraq because of Saddam, there was no way for me or any Iraqi that I knew at the time. All my Iraqi cousins, there are lots of them, 28. So all of the cousins, every Iraqi I knew supported taking out Saddam. And Saddam was not someone that anyone would wanted to live with. So at that time, when I saw many Lebanese and Arab friends opposing the war, I parted ways. I split ranks. I thought, okay, now each of us are going their separate way, and I came out in support of democracy and removal of dictatorships. And they did. And at the time, that was the first major shock of being socially shamed, physically threatened. Everyone, all your friends will stop talking to you and will try to strong arm you back into the fold, which I didn't do. And at the time, Washington was putting together an Arabic-speaking TV funded by Congress. And they recruited me, and they said, can you help us put the TV together? And I came here. That was 20 years ago, and since then I've been fighting the same fight. And the organization I work for, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. So, we think in the same way. When the whole Israel thing happened, I mean, before this has happened, I've been an advocate of peace for at least a decade now. When the Abraham Accords happened, I was one of the strong supporters, the biggest supporters in Washington, and I always write. I also write in Arabic, in the Arabic media. I go on Arabic TV, and I'm known as mostly the dissenting voice, the one who supports peace. And my arguments are not always. I don't try to tackle this topic from the perspective of an expert. So I talk to Arab friends and cousins, and I say, listen, even if everything that you're saying is right, even if these Jews are a bunch of Western European colonizers who came to you, what do you think should and can happen? Look around you. I mean, do you want to keep on fighting for 75 years? So one thing about all these people who are shouting, they don't have an end game. So they're saying, oh, Israel is evil, America is evil, you know. But then what? Do we want to fight for the rest of our lives with, you know, not thinking of the future? And it's really interesting. Many of these people who are fighting this fight, they live here, you know, or they live in Europe, and they have, I mean, their kids go to the top schools, and then they call on people over there to die and fight. And this happens in the U.S. and in Europe. Dozens and dozens of people who were supporting Hamas on the very day of October 7th, and they were supporting war. And my position was that if you support war, you take your kids and you fight it, you know. But if you're sitting here or in D.C. or in Florida or in California, and you're just advocating for war, so I mean, that's a bit unfair. So this is where I come from, but my biggest motive in this is reform within the Arabs. The Arabs have a lot to do before we get to a place where peace can happen. Over the past 20, 30 years since the Palestinians signed Oslo and all these peace conferences and treaties that happened, I think the Arab side has not done its part. Palestinians need to learn self-government. They need to learn how to self-govern. They need to build capacity. And this doesn't apply only to Palestinians. Look at Iraq, you know, the superpower went to Iraq, put its money, put its troops. Where's the government? I was there in 2003. There's no capacity. Look at Lebanon. No one is occupying Lebanon. No one occupied Lebanon. No one cares about Lebanon anyway. And it's not a country. I mean, my family lives there. My parents live there. There's no electricity. There's no water, which was funny because on October 7, when Israel decided to cut electricity and water to Gaza, and the world was crying foul, I said, really? Now they're cutting electricity? This has been the way in Lebanon for the past 10 years. So, and yet no one is talking about what happened in Syria, and no one is objecting to what's happening in Lebanon. So this is where I come from. I mean, and it's not easy to be a dissenting voice. Lawrence and I were discussing this yesterday. He asked whether there are other people from where I come who think like me. I said, of course, there are dozens and dozens. They jam my inbox, but they can't speak out. They can't. I mean, they either live over there, it's too dangerous for them. They either live here and they're being socially shamed. And this is something that I say all the time to fellow Arabs and Lebanese and Iraqis. Listen, we are one identity. We're not one opinion. We can't be of one opinion, you know. In Israel, you get dissenting voices all the time that go against the government, that go against whatever policy. In the Arab countries, you don't have a minority. You don't have a position. No one is challenging the collective delusion that everyone is living in. And that's what I've been trying to do.
So I have another question for Eyal. My favorite Hussein story, which I only learned last night, and I hope you're okay, we're on camera, was when you wanted to learn Hebrew when you're in Lebanon. So you used to sneak to the fence and talk with the Israeli soldiers to practice your Hebrew. And then when Hezbollah would come, you would have to like pretend that you were there antagonizing them, but you were really learning Hebrew letter.
Which was interesting. We were preparing notes, each one of us standing on the other side of the border. So, but yes, I mean that's.
Oh, your Hebrew is way better than my Arabic.
Well, yes, I think one of the things that they've done in the 1950s, it didn't start off this way. In 1950, the Arab League came together and they decided that they will boycott Israel, thinking that they will kill the Israeli economy. So this thing had not yet been developed into total boycott. So now in most of the Arab countries, and these are the Arab countries that are under the Iranian influence, in Arab countries, they have laws where if you see an Israeli citizen, you have to get out of the room, or close your eyes, or do something. You never talk to them. And sometimes these laws get really absurd. So if you're living in Lebanon and you're curious about Israel, or Judaism, or the Hebrew language, even at the American University of Beirut, there are not enough resources for you to read and learn and get, if you're curious, like I was curious. The only book I can remember at the time, it was Bibi Netanyahu's book, Israel, Place Under the Sun. It got translated in Jordan, Amman, in 1996. And they sent copies to Lebanon, and it was banned. And interestingly enough, at the time, it was Hariri who said, no, we have to be an open society and we have to read. And that was the first book I read, and I thought, this is unlike anything that I've read before. I mean, not that I supported everything he said at the time, but still, there are so many points that you can't learn if you live over there. So when in Lebanon, there was one spot, literally one spot in Beirut where you could get the Israeli radio channel on the AM, Reshet Aleph and Reshet Bet. And I go park there and try to listen to the news and get some words and understand Hebrew. But then I needed to talk to people. And I mean, you can't really become fluent if you don't talk to Hebrew speakers. So I'd drive to the border. At the time, it was a much less built up border, just a barbed wire, and go to the Israeli troops, start talking to them. And then out of nowhere, Hezbollah would show up, and because of course they have their eyes on the fence. And they start telling me, this is the enemy, we don't talk to them, we only curse them. And so well, I'm trying to learn the words to curse them. We have to give them time.
It's interesting. So I want to get back to Israel's response, Israel's just response and necessary response to the horrific terrorist attacks on October 7th. And if you can talk a little bit about how the soldiers are doing, a little bit about the military strategy, cutting off Gaza north to south, what they've accomplished, what they have yet to accomplish, and then I have a follow-up on hostages, ceasefire, that business.
When in the immediate aftermath of the war, the government approved the goals for the war that was announced immediately. That was to eradicate Hamas from its ruling role in Gaza and to bring back all hostages. Now that's a difficult task. Hamas took over Gaza in an election in 2006, and then really got full control of Gaza in a military coup against the Palestinian Authority in 2007. That was 16 years ago, and ever since they ruled the Strip as very, very strongly. And this, they say it now. They explain that they do not have responsibility for the people in Gaza. Well, this was the case from the beginning. They took the resources that Gaza had, and Gaza has resources. Some of them are internal, many of them are external, to build this capacity towards us. They started firing rockets at our towns almost immediately after 2007, and every time there was a round of conflict, Israel was surprised with something else. As you remember, at the beginning we weren't really aware of the capacity of the rockets, so we built Iron Dome. And then we weren't aware of the infiltrating tunnels in Protective Edge 2014. So we built the underground wall that clogged all of the tunnels, and indeed there haven't been any infra-drilling tunnels since then. But they continue to be created because this is when the sole purpose is to fight and resist and kill Jews, then this is what they do with the resources. And what has profoundly changed since 2018, when we finished the wall, was an increasing investment on their side to dig tunnels all underneath the strip. It's about 300 miles long of tunnels interconnected underneath in Gaza, underneath the cities and towns in Gaza. I don't know how long the New York metro system is, but I'm not sure it's 300 miles long. Maybe it is. I don't know. But it's a lot of tunnels, a lot of concrete, a lot of manpower built into this. Their ability to conduct very long periods of time, almost 2 months already, and they can live longer than that beneath the ground in those tunnels. That's very difficult for the IDF to fight. It's not that the IDF cannot go down there; it'll be bloody. Right? Booby trapped. They know their way around. Israel has tried from the beginning to be effective militarily.
Yeah, that's right.
Better? Can you hear me? No? You can? Okay. To try to be effective militarily without stepping into... Take this one? Okay. Oh, both of them? Without stepping into all of the traps that we know that they put there. Now, Hamas has been using its own population as human shields. This is not a cliche that Israel uses, and we say this all the time. People don't hear it anymore. When we have a war such as the one we have here, you see this in the making. Israel called for the civilian population to move to the south so that we can operate militarily in the north. Many left, but about 300,000 Palestinians stayed there, either families of Hamas or support of Hamas, or also some of them are people who cannot move to the south for various reasons. Many of them because Hamas wouldn't let them move out there. And this is very difficult to operate militarily in such settings. And indeed, there are many unintentional civilian casualties, and Israel is getting criticized for it all the time. What's important to understand in this setting is that we knew that if we need to go into Gaza militarily with a ground operation, it will look like this. We knew this for years. One of the reasons Israel avoided a previous, I would say, either opportunities or necessities to move in and to eradicate Hamas was because we knew that once we do this, it will look like this. To do this preemptively, just imagine how much more dramatic the criticism on us would have been if we've done this unprovoked. Now this is as provoked as it can be, and we get criticized in ways that you feel it already, and you will feel it more and more as things move out. So I give this as a response because it's very difficult to fight in those conditions. People try to say this is like Mosul. Well, this is not like Mosul. In Mosul, when they fled out, they had such a large Iraq around it that they could go into. When the Americans went after Al-Qaeda and Taliban, they did not use their civilian population as human shields the way Hamas did. They flee to the mountains and had extensive tunnels over there as well, but they did not fight from within the civilian population the way we deal with. This is Gaza. It's so small, 2.2 million people, and Hamas is fighting from underneath and within. So there is really, I don't like the phrase IDF is the most humane military in the world. There is no contest for that. There is no court that can analyze evidence to say that. I know what our rules of engagement are, and I know how we plan our operations, and the amount of care we give to try to avoid unintentional civilian casualties in every step that we do, in every operation and war that we do. But this is as bad as it can get. We're fighting in the midst of a very dense populated area. Now, as for the results, so far in the north of Gaza, I think the IDF is close to fulfilling what they can do. For various reasons, some of them most of the time until we started the engagement. Most of the leading terrorists of Hamas moved to the south. And this is why you'll hear more and more debate and discussions about what Israel can and cannot do in the south. President Biden yesterday presumably said that he wouldn't support Israel's calling for displacement of Palestinians in the south. Well, this may prevent us do what we need to do in Khan Yunis because they are in Khan Yunis. We'll see how this will play out as we move along. But in the north of Gaza, where most of the infrastructure, most of the rockets, most of their command and controls were, this has been attacked and handled quite extensively. But we know until we get their leadership, they will come back. When we pull out of Gaza, whenever that will be, Sinwar can come out and sit in an armchair on rubbles the way he did after Garden of the Walls in 21. The question who lost and who won will be decisive upon this single picture, as it was in 2021. We cannot let this happen. So we will need to continue in the military engagement in this way or another until Hamas is completely removed.
So, before we speak about the hostages and the ceasefire, and I'm sure the hostages are on everyone's mind as it should be, I want to ask one quick question for Hussein, because Eyal, you stated sort of what the Israeli goal is to eliminate Hamas from Gaza, but there is the argument that people say that, well, Hamas, yes, they have 35,000 fighters, terrorists, but Hamas is also an ideology, right? How do you defeat the ideology? I thought maybe briefly if you could comment on that.
Sure, I just mentioned how I saw this happening, how all these people just switched from being communist to being Islamist overnight. So the point here is that many of these ideologies are not really ideologies. They go with whoever is sponsoring them. And I can cite so many examples. So the organization, the notorious organization that everyone knows as ISIS, and it's notoriously Islamist, excuse me. All of the leadership of ISIS were junior officers with Saddam's intelligence agencies. So all of these guys were secular Baathists, but then when Saddam's Ba'ath Party fell, they had to get money, and the way to get money is to rebrand yourself to align with the donors. And the deep pockets in the region, unfortunately, until now, and are Islamist, and that's why you have Hamas. And Hamas gets its money from Qatar and from not much from Turkey. Turkey doesn't have a lot of money anyway. But this is where the money comes from. So they're Islamists. So if Qatar disappears and the Soviet Union comes back, all of Hamas will become communist. I mean, I have no doubt that will happen. So this argument that Hamas is an idea and you can't kill an idea, that's not true. Look at Arafat. Where's Arafat and his Fatah now? So it all depends on the money, and these people will change. What Israel needs to do is to take out the leadership, top 20, 30 something guys, and erode the military capabilities of these people. And once they're too weak militarily, the rest cannot be resolved on the battlefield. The rest we have to go after the funding sources, just like the US, America took out Al-Qaeda. I mean, it was not only a fight in Afghanistan or anywhere else across the world. It was the money. We went after the money. We had so many new rules and regulations imposed on the global financial system, on all banks. We started monitoring all the money, where they go from, where they come from. This has to happen with Hamas. Unfortunately, until very recently, the world did not really look at this seriously. I mean, we had a few Hamas officials put under sanctions, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done off the battlefield to supplement and in support of strangling the sources, the financial sources of Hamas. And once this is done, I can give you my guarantee. People will abandon Hamas and look for the next big sponsor.
So one other question before we get to hostages, because we didn't bring it up yet, is Israel's fighting in the south. They're also fighting in the north, but in a different way with Hezbollah. Maybe Hussein, if you could comment on your experiences with Lebanon. I guess why hasn't Hezbollah, why haven't they escalated to a point which would force the Israelis to respond more heavily? And I guess a follow-up to that is, why don't you think the Israelis would want to escalate to take, because at the end of the day, you could take out Hamas in the south, but then you're still going to have the Radwan and 150,000 missiles, 10,000 precision-guided missiles in the north, and how do you expect Israeli families to go back to Metula? Maybe you could comment on this as well, knowing that Hezbollah is still there. I mean, it seems odd.
So I'll take the Lebanese part, and Eyal will handle the Israel side.
You always take the easy part.
So on Hezbollah, after they started their military escalation across the border on October 8th, unprovoked. So they started this whole thing, and unfortunately the world doesn't look at it this way. In everybody's mind, this war is just going on as if no one started it. But anyway, there has been an interest among Hezbollah not to go into full-scale war like what happened in 2006. Nasrallah stayed silent for the first 3 weeks that followed October 7. And everyone was wondering, what's wrong with this guy? I mean, he usually speaks to a graduate of high school class or something. So he stayed silent, and then when he came out and delivered a speech that was much hyped up, he talked for 2 hours, said all the things about the Israel and the US and whatnot. My take was a single sentence that I thought was the most interesting. He said that in 2006, in our war with Israel, we lost 150,000 residential units. And that was the first time he said this statement. And to me, this means that whatever deterrence Israel planted in 2006, and Eyal can talk about this more, but in Israel there's what's called the Dahya doctrine, because Israel went really heavy on the southern suburb of Beirut. Dahya means suburb. They went on the southern suburb of Beirut, and that's the equivalent of Gaza and Lebanon. That's where everyone who supports Hezbollah and the Hezbollah leadership lives. So these partisans of Hezbollah, the Shia of Lebanon, they lost a lot of residential houses. And at the time, the Lebanese economy was okay, the Iranian economy was okay. The Gulf countries rushed a lot of money to help. They reconstructed all of these units. If this is to be repeated tomorrow, no one can rebuild all these residential units. So that, to my mind, is what's deterring Nasrallah from escalating this into full-scale war. I think Nasrallah will only go into full-scale war if Israel comes after him, or maybe if Iran is hit and they ask him to do something. But he will not go full-scale, only for Hamas. And we've seen Khalid Mash'ad, the leader of Hamas, he's been on TV saying, well, we thank Nasrallah for whatever he's doing, but that's not enough. So whatever cross-border is happening now is not enough. One final note I will say is that in any different period of time, if Hezbollah had started clashes across the border and killed at least 10 Israelis, as has happened now, Israel would have been in Beirut by now. But Israel also has been patient. More than 10 Israelis have been killed. Areas have been, people who live on the border have been taken back, but Israel has not responded. I think Eyal knows better than me about this.
Briefly on Hezbollah, and then I have one more question, and then we're going to get into Q&A.
So a few things about Lebanon. First, I will be very careful in trying to pretend to understand the calculus of Nasrallah. And the reason for that is that we also thought that Sinwar was wary of opening a full-scale war with us because of the devastation that happened Gaza in 2021. But at a certain point in time, he made a decision that his legacy and the ideology is more important than taking care of its own people. They lost way more than 150,000 residential units in Gaza. And it's in our conventional wisdom that Nasrallah is more serious and responsible than Sinwar. That can change. That can change in a certain circumstance as well. I argued that Israel shouldn't open another front at this point. Gaza is difficult enough, as I said before, especially if we want to do something meaningful and reach the outcome that we need, and not only to leave devastation as we did in the past. It will be difficult to do this in two fronts. So I supported not opening another front preemptively. I will say that it's true that Israel has been very kind of absorbing to what and restrained to what Nasrallah has done, but I think in reverse it's even more meaningful, because we killed more than 80 Hezbollah terrorists. Most of them are Adwan. Nasrallah always took pride in the equation, their equation, that for every killed Lebanese there will be a killed Israeli, and he has been showing restraint, but I don't call that deterrence. I think it's just an analysis on his side. Enough damage was inflicted in Israel with one proxy organization that would eventually end its part in history, and I don't think that Iran wanted to sacrifice two tools in this game in the same round. They will need Hezbollah for a future round. As for what it means for the population, that is a big problem. That is a big problem. I spoke to the people from what we call Otef Asa, the people from the south. They don't know when they will go back to their homes, either in the south. Just think about raising kids again in a place where something like October 7 happened. And Israel will need to be very effective in creating new security arrangements in the south, a DMZ inside of Gaza with all of the implications of that. And after the removal of Hamas from rule of Gaza, Israel will continue to interdict militarily as needed to prevent the uprising of new extreme organizations. This is all part of the thinking that we need to do about the day after. Otherwise, people will not go back to their homes in the south. And if they don't come back to their homes in the south, we have no example to show for the people in the north. That's a big problem. I think the worst part of it is that not only didn't we prepare for that, we weren't ready for that. Israel as a country, with everything that happened during 2023, was not in the proper level of performance for that. There's going to be a lot of work in the future to rebuild the trust with the population.
So one final question, and then we'll get into Q&A. And maybe Eyal, you're probably best to answer this about the hostages, the ceasefire being extended for 2 days.
It's a truce. It's not
a truce. A hudna, as they say. Look, it's on the one hand, the Israeli government has the responsibility to bring home every citizen who's kidnapped, but it's difficult, right? Because you have to stop the military operating.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about, and from what we understand, the hostages are spread out. Maybe Hamas isn't actually controlling all the hostages at this point. It's fair to say that Americans have not been the ones that have been released thus far, which makes sense. Hamas is using them as leverage. Maybe just for a couple of minutes speak about that, and then we'll get into Q&A.
So the first thing is that Hamas wants us to believe variously. They're in control of Gaza. They know where the hostages are, and if they don't, it's because they don't want to know. If they'd want to know, they would. And I think any kind of loopholes they left were closed after we were able to rescue Ori, the female soldier, a few days after we started the ground invasion. If we knew where she is, Hamas probably knew where she is also. And it's very probable that they have consolidated that. So far, things have, over the last four days of rounds of releasing hostages, almost as planned. Of course, there must be drama with Hamas, otherwise they don't get their leverage for the future. There are many more women and children in Gaza. It's not only the Bibas family that everybody's waiting to get back, those redhead, beautiful children. One of them is 11 months old, Kfir, and his brother Eyal is 4. But there are more, right? I mean, those are just the famous picture that you may have seen before that. And then there are also elderly, ill, handicapped, and also grown men that also have a right to exist and to live again. This is, I think, the most painful scar in the community right now. You've heard people say at the beginning of that they wish their loved ones were killed and not kidnapped. That's just horrific thinking of parents over their kids. I'm very, I don't know what word to use. My English isn't good enough, so you'll help me with a verb. But I want to say that the fact that all of those kids are alive and at least physically intact is better than I expected. I thought would face worse consequences after 50-something days in tunnels. And we'll need to see how this plays out. As for the dilemma for the government, indeed, this is a very strong dilemma. I've been asked that. I've been in media. I've been asking these questions a lot, and I give them the same answer. I'm proud to be a part of a country, of a people who would prefer to get people alive, even if it means that we delay the fulfillment of our national security goals. That's who we are. First time I said, "Kol ha'metzil nefesh echad, kilu etzil olam umlo," in CNN. The anchor looked at me, "What are you doing talking Hebrew on live broadcast in the U.S.?" But it's true, right? I mean, this is something that this is a core belief of who we are. And I'm proud that they were able to do this. I was actually worried that for various reasons, the government won't approve it. And the fact that only the far-right extremist Ben Gvir and his 2 thugs didn't approve it is better than I was worried also in our politics. And we need to see how this plays out. They agreed for 4 more days of truce, about 10 hostages a day. That should lead us to about 90, more than a third, only a third of the people who were abducted. I won't get into details, but there is a question as how many more are alive, how many more are not soldiers, which is clear that Hamas will not return until this ends. I was overseeing the negotiation to bring back the 4 we had from before October 7th. Hadar Goldin, Oron Shaul, the 2 dead soldiers, and Avera Mengistu, Hisham Said, the 2 civilians who crossed the border. And we knew that for Hamas, I mean, to give everybody back and not to keep bargaining chips is a decision. They cannot comprehend something like that. They have to continue. This is always the end of the process for them. So this will take a long time. I hope that we can get all the live ones first, especially children and their mothers and the weak, the elderly, the handicapped, the ill first, and then see how it plays out.
So we're going to get into Q&A now, but just I guess I'll end with a quick statement. I'm sure everyone here, like we do, we had a lot of emotions on October 7th, right? I mean, I urge you not to watch the 45-minute videos of the horrific brutality. Now, people talk ISIS, it's worse than ISIS, what they did. It's worse than what the Nazis did to the Jewish people. It's absolutely horrific, and you know, we're angry, we're hurting, but at the same time, we have to be resolved, and we have to have hope, all right? For thousands of years, the Jewish people did not have a state, did not have an army to protect them. Now they do, and in my opinion, as an American, they're doing what we would ask from our government in the United States. God forbid anything like that happen here. And you, just by being here, gives us hope, right? Because, you know, when Eyal or Hussein's on BBC or CNN or some of these places, and you're getting grilled all the time, and they do an amazing job. You just being here, you're not bystanders, you're upstanders, right? You're supporting your community. You're speaking up. We were speaking with Larry before, you're putting posters. And despite the crazy people taking them down, you're putting posters and letting your community know that every hostage needs to come back, right? And telling your neighbors who aren't in the Jewish community, saying, this isn't just an Israel issue, this is an American issue. And for the Jewish community, Israel is not only fighting for Israel, it's fighting for the entire Jewish community, right? So thank you for all you do. Thank you for what you continue to do. I'll say it again before Q&A. You are lucky to be living in this community. I'll tell you, we travel a lot. We mostly don't speak to Jewish communities, but we travel a lot to Jewish communities. And MetroWest is really amazing. The amount you care about the Jewish community, the amount you care about Israel, and you're very, very blessed. And I urge you to continue staying involved with the JCC, continue supporting the JCC and the other institutions, and be, as they say, be a light unto the nations. You guys should be a light unto the other communities in this country. So keep on doing what you're doing. So we're happy to answer any questions. I'm sure you have some. And even though we can stay here until 6 o'clock tonight. So if you want to, there's no time limit. And if you could direct the question to a particular person, it would be helpful. Or if you direct it to me, I'll take them or I'll choose.
I think this should be for Eyal, but anybody else who wants to go ahead. A lot has been said about how Hamas is able to use the pause to set more explosives, to move hostages around, but I'm sure Israel has not been standing still either, and using the pause to whatever advantage they can. So the first part of the question is, what could or should Israel have been doing during this pause, particularly in light of the fact that in the first phase was heavy on bombing, encouraging Gazans to move south. Or in the second phase, when Israel apparently has to do more fighting in the south, they're going to be up against two things. One is the vast population move to the south, and B, there's going to be even more criticism if they involve a heavy bombing campaign. So how can they continue to prosecute the war, taking those two factors into consideration?
Yeah. So I'll give a brief answer because number one, many of that I don't know because I'm here and not in Israel. And the things I do know, I better not say. But I will say that Israel, of course, is using the time. I mean, this is those pauses give an opportunity not only to collect intelligence but also to plan accordingly for future steps. Some of those soldiers haven't met their families for almost 2 months, and many of them have now been, kind of refreshed a little bit before they go back in to continue the fighting. But having said all that, for the specific military purposes, this pause is bad. If it was only for operational decision making, if it wasn't about rescuing or getting hostages released, Israel wouldn't agree to a pause at this stage. But the IDF will need to make the best out of it. It's a decision made by the policymakers, and I think it was a just one. And they will need to cope with everything else. About the South, it's really I don't have a good answer to that. I think that of course the pressure on Israel is already increasing. As I said before, President Biden has been wonderful in giving unequivocal support to Israel from the outset of the war. But when he said yesterday that he expects Israel not to dislocate more civilian population, there are not good ways to conduct what we need to conduct in the South if we don't move them for where we need to operate. So I don't have a good answer for you about how this will play out. I hope that Prime Minister Netanyahu is serious and responsible enough to make the right navigations through this and to conduct the negotiations he needs to do with the Americans over this, and to start talking about the strategy in the day after, which so far he has been avoiding to discuss with the Americans. That doesn't help in getting more support from the U.S. There is much more humanitarian aid that Israel can give Palestinians. Difficult to do in this composition of government, but necessary to do. I think necessary absolutely, not just because this is good for explaining why we need more time, but definitely because we need more time. And I'm not sure that he can do that. So I don't know how this will play out. It's very likely that we will see the war end sooner than what it should be. It's already been longer than any war we did since the Lebanese war. And in protective edge, Israel was stopped after 51 days. In the second Lebanese war, Israel was stopped after 35 days, and we're already 53 or 4 days. So I don't have a good answer.
Thank you for your great presentations. I have a question about American policy. Our troops have been attacked dozens of times over the past month, 6 weeks or so. And yet our own response from the United States has been 4 or 5. To what do you attribute this relative lack of response on the part of the Americans?
So I guess I'll start and then Hussein. As Eyal said, I think, and again, I'm going to call balls and strikes. Some may agree, some may disagree. I think on the Hamas issue, rhetorically, President Biden, let's say, he deserves an A. On the Iran issue, I think our government deserves an F. We had readout yesterday from the Department of Defense, the Pentagon. Our soldiers are frustrated because we've been attacked now, I think, 73 times during this war without a real response. I mean, we brought the carriers over, and just yesterday the Iranian Navy surrounded our carrier and actually forced them to move. So that's not the type of deterrent that I think will be necessary. For a number of reasons, I believe, some I can explain, some I can't. We have adopted a policy of appeasement as it relates to Iran. And what we need to understand is, Iran is the head of, as we say, and Eyal said this when he was in government, is the head of the octopus, right? Hamas and Hezbollah and the Shia militias and the Houthis, those are just the tentacles. And Hamas is escalating, and not only are we not responding to them militarily, but we're giving them tens of millions of dollars for them hitting our troops. I think there's a thinking in certain people in government that now we're on camera. But I think there's some thinking of people in government who believe that if you put pressure on some of our adversaries, they're going to escalate. Whereas my opinion is that if you put more pressure on our adversaries, they're going to back down because we're more powerful. So it's a very much a different worldview. I think there still is some hopes among some people in the Biden administration of coming back to some sort of nuclear deal. Full disclosure, I thought the JCPOA was a fatally flawed agreement to begin with because of the sunsets, no missiles, all these reasons we could talk about. But I think their lack of response is both an extension of the Iran policy that we've had, and also them not wanting to open another front with Hezbollah. And they feel like if they respond too much, then Iran's going to tell Hezbollah to get involved, and maybe they're going to start shooting back and forth. I don't know if you have.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with what Lawrence said, that our policy on Iran has been an F. A few things that I will add about Iran is that the way Iran operates, the Iranian regime, is that number one, they never fight. They're not interested in going to war with the US or with anybody else. They want to fight this to the last Palestinian or Lebanese or Iraqi. And number two, what they do is that they take the measurements of every leader and president we have in this country. They keep on poking and they see where's the red line. And when we took Soleimani out, their general, they just sat back and stopped provoking for 2 full years. Not a single shot, no enrichment of uranium, nothing. They got scared. So what they're doing now is that they're trying to test the waters with President Biden. And not to get into too much detail, but in Iraq we have 2,500 military advisors. These troops don't have heavy equipment. So they're like troops, but there are no tanks or howitzers or, so the only cover that they can get is from the air. So if the militias, if the pro-Iran militias in Iraq decide to go after our troops are vulnerable. And the DOD has been saying this for some time. They've been saying we have to take a decision, and this is what we saw last week for the first time. We hit Iran militias in Iraq, inside of Iraq. This is the first time we do it since so many years back. So, we got something right, but I think there's a long way to go. I think the Iranians have to know that they will not be safe if American troops are hurt. So you kill an American soldier, or you hurt an American soldier, you will be a strike inside of Tehran. I'm not calling for war with Iran. I'm just saying, if you tell them you're not safe, then they'll probably step back.
And then, wait, there's one back here, hold on.
I wanted to ask about the other war and narrative that's going on, which is the fight over people's hearts and minds. So you're involved in the protection of democracy, and it feels like the democracy that we have now is under assault in terms of freedom of speech, in terms of being able to counter some of these protests that feel threatening to so many, particularly, of course, on college campuses, but really everywhere. So I guess I'm wondering, what is the best way to begin the process of countering this assault on American values?
It's a great question. I have this conversation with my colleagues all the time, is that in many ways, I'm more concerned about America than I am about Israel, right? Israel will protect itself. Israel will, I hope, will do what it needs to do to defeat the enemy. I'm very concerned about exactly what you said. I'm very concerned about, people waving Taliban and ISIS flags on college campuses in America. I'm very concerned about Jewish students having to lock themselves in a library, a group or union, for fear of being physically attacked. I'm very concerned about a Jewish professor yesterday, also in New York, who was also had to lock themselves in the office because they dared to go to a pro-Israel rally, right? I'm very concerned that, if I were to send Hussein or Eyal on a college campus today to speak, there would be a protest and they would be shouted down. But if people who have opposing views, they're free to talk, and it's freedom of speech for one side and not the other side. I'm very concerned about all of this stuff. What I would say, and this may not be the right answer, and again, I say this as someone who's an immigrant to this country. When I grew up, I always wanted to live in the United States. I didn't know Democrat from Republican, right versus left. I just remember what America stands for: freedom, free market, equality, democracy. And part of me in my heart says it would be the most un-American thing to give up on America, right? Maybe there's, things operate in a pendulum and they've shifted one way and hopefully they will come back. I'm hoping. I'm not completely convinced. I don't see how that's coming. I think the one thing we can't do is be silent. I think we can't be silent. I think for many years, people have ignored the problem you're highlighting, and now we see it on the news post-October 7th. But the same issues that you're saying, well, when I was a professor in 2000, it was the same thing on the college campus, and none of it changed. And my campus in 2002 in Montreal, when there were riots, when former Prime Minister Netanyahu came in, my rabbi was attacked, my father was spit on. I mean, this was happening. It was the exact same thing. It's only going to get worse. I think, number one, we have to speak up. Number two, I do think that the majority of people in this country, Peter Senge at MIT says a noble mind is one who succumbs to reason. I do think the majority of people in America understand that there's good and that there's evil. Now, they're not as active, and I think it's part of your job as a community to activate more people, not only in the Jewish community, but outside the Jewish community. I think bullies like to cower you into submission, right? They want to shout you down and make you afraid to stand up, or make you afraid to put those posters up, or make you afraid to have a pro-Israel rally. And look, your community had 6,000 people. That sends an amazing message. I think a lot of things need to happen for college kids on college campuses. I think, you mentioned it briefly, I don't know if this is where you're going, I think the college campuses have structural problems that need to be solved. And I say this as a former professor. The students are transient, right? You're always going to have student activists. They're going to come, they're going to go, right? Except for the professional activists who stay on for 25 years and still cause problems. But you know who stays? Administrators, presidents of universities, now the DEI professionals, professors who politicize the classroom, foreign funding. I mean, these are issues that someone, and this isn't something FDD does, to be frank, but this is things that organizations or the community needs to deal with. Those are structural impediments.
Yeah, sure. I'll just quickly add that the concept of cultural relativism, and that's to say that democracy works only in the West or applies to Western countries, and that if you take democracy and apply it to other countries, such as Arab countries, it doesn't work and it's not good. And instead, we have to promote everything that's organic and native over there. And I totally disagree with this. And I think if we do activate everything that's native, then we'll have to deal with honor crimes. We'll have to, then LGBTQ will not be tolerated. And this is the biggest irony in this country. You see all these LGBTQ groups supporting Hamas. And you're thinking, do you really know what happens if you go and stand next to a Hamas guy? So there's a lot of misinformation that we try to correct all the time. But for some reason, many Americans seem to be not sure that democracy is the best course for everyone. And that liberty, maybe, we can not really stress on it. I disagree. I think this is still the best form of government for everyone around the world, even if it's not ideal, even, they're not perfect. But, we have to fight for it. And luckily, I work for an organization that's called, Defending Democracy. And I'm happy about it.
Yes,
I thank you. Amazing, terrific presentation. I'd just like to ask you, there's a lot of talk now about trying to revive efforts for a two-state solution. And what do you think are the prospects for the revival and even strengthening of the Abraham Accords?
So why don't we, Eyal, do the two-state solution, and maybe Hussein talk about the Abraham Accords.
I think this is one of the worst times to talk about reviving this concept. Not because this wouldn't ultimately be something that we will need to strive for. It's just that every time there was a process to make any kind of progress towards that end, Hamas come up and trash the party. They've done so after the Oslo Accords. Not only them, Fatah and Arafat also did a large share of terrorizing. But the buses that I remember as a young adult being blown up in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv were by Hamas suicide actors. And when Israel withdrew completely from the Gaza Strip in 2005, as was demanded also by the international community, to the last inch, to the last grave, without leaving anyone on Rafah, a route called Philadelphia, Hamas took over the way I said before. And here we are in the midst of normalization with Saudi Arabia, the holy grail of normalizations with the Arab countries, and the spoiler is Hamas again. So I think that talking about this now is just completely irrelevant. What is important in order to have any kind of future in Gaza is to remove Hamas from power, to start the process that Hussein talked about before, of de-radicalization, in the sense that there will be some kind of pragmatic groups that we can deal with to have a future of joint coexistence. At this point, when the stronger narrative of the Palestinian population is that Israel doesn't have a right to exist, then we're questioning all of the paradigms again. I think that once we are successful in removing Hamas and take the time that we need, and because I know, I'll leave for Hussein to give details on this, but it is clear that the Abrahamic Accord process is not only halting, I think it will actually accelerate, because those countries are also in understanding that radical Islam is a national security threat for them as well. And if you listen carefully to how the Emiratis have been talking about this, how the Bahrainis have been talking about this, how the Moroccans have been talking about this, and even the Saudis in the convention that they did in Riyadh, I wouldn't say that they give unequivocal support to Israel, right? There's a limit to what we can expect, but they were very clear about their willingness for these processes to continue, and they will. So eventually, I hope that there will be new setting that would allow us to go also into some kind of process with the Palestinians. But right now, and I know that the people in the administration who think that this is, they just snap their fingers and things will be magically resolved again. They are wrong, and Israel will need to be strong.
Yes, well, peace between any two countries requires two governments. And we have an issue in Arab countries that we don't have governments, or we have failing governments. And if you look at the Abraham Accords, you will notice that the more successful the government, the better the peace. And that's why you have the best peace so far between Arab sides and Israel has been with the UAE. And that's mainly because the UAE, as a successful government, they think of their interests. And of course they like peace and everything, but they're interested in bilateral trade. They're interested in technology exchange. They're interested in all the normal ideas that the two governments are interested in. And now we have Saudi Arabia following suit. They're emulating the Emirati government model, not only on peace with Israel, but as a whole model. They're switching, they're transforming the economies from economies built on oil rent to economies that want to be based on knowledge economies and services. And that's why they went to peace with Israel, the Emiratis and the Bahrainis, and that's why the Saudis are coming. This debate that you see in the Gulf is not happening anywhere in Lebanon or Syria or Iraq. What you have are militias dominated by Iran, dominating the government is failing. And the same thing is happening with the Palestinians. Until they can get a government that's functional, no amount of peace treaties signed with the Israelis will count, because it'll be like Arafat. He signs peace and Hamas blows up buses. So the Palestinians have to do the heavy lifting here and get themselves one functioning and good government. And then, I'm sure peace will just happen on its own.
We have time for one more question.
So, to sort of segue into that, it doesn't look like the Palestinians are in a position right now to create that kind of government. So after this ends, and assuming that Hamas is completely decimated in terms of its structural abilities and military and governing abilities, what do you envision is the best, at least initial, governing body or bodies or coalition for Gaza?
So, from what we know about the Gazan population, it is eminent that there is a lot of popular support for Hamas. But I think, as Hussein explained before, a part of it is a consequence of reality and not the driver of reality. There is also many Gazans who understand that for Gaza to ever be a place that they can call home, they need a new arrangement in Gaza that is not violent, and they also live there. Some of their houses have been demolished because we attacked Rumal, the more wealthy neighborhood in north of Gaza. But it's still true. Now, my hope, I will say, at this point, because I'm not an official, so I can't say my plan, but it would be a plan, is to work with those pragmatic forces and to reinstall a different civilian governing power in Gaza that can take care of the Gazans, who care about the Gazans more than they care about the ideology of Hamas towards us. When the government I served, the National Security Advisor, approved 15,000 work permits for Gazans to work in Israel, this was an act in this in this direction, because we thought that there was importance in strengthening a kind of middle class population there, so there will be a future ever in a foreseeable scenario. Some of those workers, granted, have collected intelligence for the Hamas attack. We were getting more and more evidence of that, but I don't think this was fundamentally wrong in thinking that this is what we need to do. So it's going to take time, it's going to be tedious, it's going to be difficult, we're going to need to withstand some pressure from the question before that, because there will be external forces thinking that we need to rush it and just finish it, and but Israel has been struggling for 75 years. Unfortunately, we got another reminder that this will take some longer before we can each live tachat gofno v'tachat te'emerto. I don't know how to say that in English, my vocabulary is good. So this is a prospect of how we should go about this. I think the support of the Arab countries around is going to be crucially important. And some of them are already engaging towards that end because they understand that this is in their interest as well. I think when President Sisi said the other day that in his vision Gaza would be led by a demilitarized governance, this is not something that President of Egypt would say easily, of course, but he did. So I think we're starting to understand that there are forces that understand that get it, that this is the kind of solution we need to achieve. It's going to be a lot of heavy lifting to get there.
Well, just two quick remarks here. One, there was a short, successful Palestinian experiment, and that was during the days of their Prime Minister Salam Fayyad. And because he was successful, he was kicked out because Abbas, he stopped Abbas's, whatever Abbas is doing. So maybe if we can get him or someone similar like him to, start a new experiment over there. The other thing is that we have to switch regional sponsors in Gaza from Qatar, which is currently in charge, to the UAE and the Saudis. And I think the UAE are interested and the Saudis are interested in Gaza. Will need a lot of money and Arab and diplomatic sponsorship to be rebuilt. And if we can get the Saudis and the Emiratis to replace the Qataris, I think that would be a great idea.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you very much. Really appreciate all of your insight and being here with us. I want to thank Amelia and Corey Pearlstein for making the recommendation to bring you here today. So thank you very much for all your